This podcast is brought to you by the Average Intelligence Podcast.
Welcome to the AI Analysis Podcast. Today, we're doing something a little different. With everything going on in the Middle East right now, we wanted to go through basically what's happening and how we got here. We understand this is an incredibly complex and emotionally weighty situation, especially when focusing on the evolving and recently very direct hostilities between Israel and Iran. This isn't just about the headlines you're seeing today. It's truly a culmination of, well, decades of history marked by surprising shifts and profound consequences.
That's right. Our mission with this analysis is really to help you untangle those historical threads that have woven together to bring us to this exact moment. We're going to explore the transformation of this relationship, which, believe it or not, actually began with early diplomatic ties and has now escalated to a state of, well, open military exchanges. Along the way, we'll be looking at the key political shifts that have occurred, the pivotal role that nuclear ambitions have played, the widespread influence of proxy conflicts, and of course, the undeniable and ever-present influence of oil geopolitics. We're here to guide you through this raw material, helping you understand the context and the key events that have shaped this volatile region.
And to do that, we're pulling information from some very detailed journalistic and academic timelines. Specifically, we're drawing from a timeline of conflict between Israel and Iran from AP News. Also, the U.S.-Iran conflict, a timeline of how we got here, and timeline U.S. relations with Iran from the Council on Foreign Relations. Our aim, as always, is to provide a comprehensive, fact-based understanding of these events, conveying the information as presented in these sources without taking any sides.
Right, just the facts as reported.
Exactly, and allowing you to form your own informed perspective. So let's unpack this relationship, which for many might seem surprising, given that it hasn't always been defined by overt hostility. Where do we even begin to trace these very complex origins?
Well, the narrative truly begins long before the seismic shift of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. For decades prior, Iran, under the leadership of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi.
The Shah.
Yeah, the Shah. He actually maintained significant economic, security, and diplomatic ties, not only with Western nations, but even, perhaps unexpectedly, with Israel. What's crucial to understand here is just how deeply intertwined the early relationship was between Iran and the United States.
How so? What are the key moments there?
Well, consider the 1953 CIA-assisted coup, for instance. Our sources, including that Council on Foreign Relations timeline, detail how U.S. and British intelligence agencies actively helped elements within the Iranian military overthrow
Their own government.
their democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. Yeah.
Why? What was the trigger?
This wasn't some random act. It was a direct response to Mossadegh's nationalization of the British-owned Anglo-Persian oil company.
Ah, oil. There it is.
Exactly. That nationalization had prompted London to impose an oil embargo on Iran. So the coup reinstated the Western-friendly Shah, who then relied on substantial U.S. support to maintain his rule right up until his eventual overthrow in 1979. This moment, for many Iranians, is seen as a foundational point of distrust towards the U.S. It's not just history. It's a deep-seated grievance that really shapes their foreign policy even today.
Okay, so it really starts with oil, even back then, and a clear act of foreign intervention shaping Iranian leadership. And those interventions didn't stop there, did they? I mean, the oil connection continued.
You're absolutely right. That oil connection deepened almost immediately. Following the coup, under significant U.S. and U.K. pressure, the Shah signed what was known as the Consortium Agreement of 1954.
The Consortium Agreement.
Yes. This agreement, also noted in the Council on Foreign Relations timeline, it granted U.S., British, and French oil companies a substantial 40% ownership stake in the nationalized Iranian oil industry.
40%? Wow.
For 25 years. Yeah. This cemented a significant foreign presence and influence in Iran's absolutely vital oil sector, further reinforcing a sense of, external control over Iran's most valuable resource.
And it wasn't just about oil or political control, was it? It also extended into nuclear cooperation, which, given the current tensions, that's truly mind-boggling to think about.
It genuinely is. Consider the Atoms for Peace program initiated in 1957. Both the AP News and Council on Foreign Relations timelines highlight this. The United States and Iran signed a cooperation concerning civil uses of atoms agreement as part of President Dwight D. Eisenhower's broader Atoms for Peace program. The U.S. actually provided Iran with a reactor and, critically, even weapons-grade enriched uranium fuel.
Weapons grade? Seriously?
Yes. This seemingly innocuous initiative decades ago laid the very foundation for Iran's nuclear program, and the collaboration continued right up until the 1979 revolution.
That's incredible. So the U.S. actually helped start the program they're now trying so hard to stop.
It shows how profoundly geopolitical alignments can shift over time. It's a stark, almost unbelievable contrast.
And that collaboration extended to military support too, right? Creating a formidable regional ally for the U.S. at the time.
Indeed it did. In 1972, President Richard Nixon visited Iran, and our sources note that he solicited the Shah's assistance in safeguarding U.S. security interests in the Middle East, particularly against a Soviet-allied Iraq.
Which was a big Cold War concern then.
Exactly. In exchange for this cooperation, Nixon pledged that Iran could purchase virtually any non-nuclear weapon system it desired.
A blank check, almost.
Pretty much. And then, following the 1973 Arab-Israeli War and the subsequent Arab oil embargo against the U.S., oil prices skyrocketed. This surge in revenue enabled the Shah to acquire a much larger supply of high-tech weaponry than initially anticipated. And this reportedly unsettled some U.S. officials, even back then.
That's a fascinating detail, that even back then there were concerns about the scale of Iran's military acquisitions. So a potential imbalance was already being noticed. And Iran wasn't just a player in bilateral agreements. They were also a major force on the global oil stage through OPEC.
Absolutely. The birth of OPEC in 1960 is another critical piece of this pre-revolution puzzle. Iran was a founding member.
Right, along with Iraq, Kuwait,
Saudi Arabia and Venezuela, yes.
Yeah.
Its stated purpose, according to the Council on Foreign Relations timeline, was to challenge the dominance of mostly Western oil companies and regain control over their domestic oil reserves. By the 1970s, OPEC's profits surged, granting the group considerable leverage over Western economies.
So Iran's role within OPEC bolstered its standing.
It solidified its position as a crucial U.S. ally at the time, illustrating the early strategic importance placed on its oil resources.
Okay, so what we've seen is deeply intertwined relationship, built on shared interests around oil and security.
Right.
But also with these underlying tensions from foreign intervention, like the 53 coup, creating this growing undercurrent of Iranian resentment.
Precisely.
But then came 1979, and that's when everything dramatically changed for Iran and its place in the world.
The Iranian Revolution was, without exaggeration, a watershed moment. It fundamentally reshaped not just Iran internally, but its entire relationship with the United States and the broader world. It transformed Iran from a pro-Western monarchy into a vehemently anti-Western Islamic theocracy. The consequences are still reverberating today.
So what happened in 79 specifically?
Well, the Islamic Revolution was driven by widespread civil unrest against the Shah's rule. Both the AP News and Council on Foreign Relations timelines explain how this unrest ultimately led to the Shah's flight from Iran. Grand Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a prominent Shiite cleric who had consistently opposed the Shah's westernization policies.
He'd been in exile, right?
For 14 years, yes. He returned to the country. Khomeini swiftly assumed power as the supreme leader in December of that year, transforming Iran into a theocracy. And crucially, it explicitly identified Israel as a major enemy from that point forward. A radical ideological shift.
And the most dramatic and immediate consequence of that shift for the U.S. was the Iran hostage crisis, an event that really cemented the new animosity.
It certainly did. November 1979, a group of radical Iranian college students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, took 52 Americans hostage.
52. And their main demand.
Their primary demand, as outlined in the Council on Foreign Relations timeline, was the extradition of the Shah. He'd been admitted to the U.S. for cancer treatment.
Okay, and the U.S. response?
Washington severed diplomatic ties with Tehran, imposed sanctions on Iranian oil imports, froze Iranian assets. It was an agonizing ordeal.
How long did it last?
444 days, an incredible length of time.
Wow.
The hostages were finally released under the Algiers Accords, signed just minutes after President Ronald Reagan's inauguration. A key part of those accords was a U.S. promise not to intervene in Iranian politics, a commitment reflecting the profound distrust generated by the crisis.
And the revolution's impact wasn't contained within Iran's borders, was it? You mentioned they explicitly sought to export their ideology.
That's a critical point. Ayatollah Khomeini made an explicit declaration that Iran would seek to export its revolution to neighboring countries.
So not just military support, but like spreading the ideology itself.
Exactly. It was a strategic and ideological imperative to spread its unique brand of Islamic governance and anti-Western revolutionary fervor. This ambition directly led to the emergence of militant groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon in 1985 as detailed in the Council on Foreign Relations timeline. Hezbollah publicly pledged allegiance to Khomeini and very quickly became a significant instrument of Iranian influence in the region. It operated as a non-state actor extending Iran's power.
A proxy.
A key proxy, yes. Countering perceived Western and Israeli influence throughout the Middle East. It was a new form of asymmetric warfare that would define much of the ensuing conflict.
So this period really firmly set the stage for decades of complex, often indirect, and eventually direct confrontation between Iran, Israel, and the United States. It seems a dangerous cycle of escalation was well underway.
Indeed, following the revolution, we observe a distinct and consistent pattern. Iran supporting various non-state actors and proxy groups.
Like Hezbollah.
Right. Across the Middle East. Simultaneously, both Iran and its adversaries, particularly Israel and the U.S., engaged in increasingly covert and overt operations against each other. It led to a dangerous and often tragic cycle of escalation.
Can you give an example of that early escalation?
A stark example is the Beirut barracks bombing on October 23, 1983. The Council on Foreign Relations timeline details this horrific event. 2 trucks laden with explosives drove into barracks housing American and French service members of the multinational force in Lebanon.
Yeah.
The detonation killed 241 U.S. military personnel. It was the highest single-day death toll for the U.S. armed forces since the Tet Offensive in Vietnam.
And who claimed responsibility?
A group named Islamic Jihad, widely believed to be a front for Hezbollah, claimed responsibility. This devastating bombing hastened the withdrawal of U.S. Marines from Lebanon, and it directly led to the State Department designating Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism in 1984.
Which is a designation that still stands today, right?
It does. A key and contentious aspect of their relationship. It solidified the perception of Iran as a direct threat to U.S. personnel and interests.
And that designation definitely played into another major scandal of the Reagan era, the Iran-Contra affair. This was a truly bizarre chapter where, despite all the public hostility, there were secret dealings with Iran.
It was a shocking revelation, underscored the complex and often contradictory nature of foreign policy. In 1985, despite an existing arms embargo against Iran...
An embargo was in place.
Yes. Senior Reagan administration officials began secretly selling weapons to Iran.
Secretly selling weapons. Why?
The primary motive, as explained in the Council on Foreign Relations timeline, was to secure the release of 7 Americans held hostage by Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Okay, so arms for hostages.
But what made the scandal even more egregious was that funds from these illegal arms sales were then diverted.
Diverted where?
To fund the right-wing Contras rebel groups in Nicaragua, after Congress had explicitly prohibited further funding of that insurgency.
Wow. So illegal arms sales funding an illegal war effort.
Pretty much. Reagan eventually took responsibility, but the affair led to convictions of some officials, highlighting a deep disconnect between public policy and covert ops.
And then in 1988, we saw a direct military confrontation, one with a truly tragic outcome that left a lasting scar.
Yes. April 18, 1988, brought Operation Praying Mantis. This was the U.S. Navy's retaliatory campaign after an Iranian mine nearly sank an American frigate in the Strait of Hormuz.
Retaliation for the mine attack.
Right. American forces responded by destroying 2 Iranian oil platforms and sinking an Iranian frigate. But critically, in July of that same year...
What happened in July?
The U.S. Navy mistakenly shot down Iran Air Flight 655, a civilian passenger jet.
Oh, no.
They identified it as a fighter jet. Tragically, all 290 people on board were killed.
All civilian.
All civilians. While the U.S. maintained it was a horrific accident, Iranians widely perceived the attack as intentional. As both the AP News and U.S.-Iran conflict timelines recount, this event remains a deep wound in U.S.-Iran relations, fostering lasting resentment and distrust.
A terrible tragedy. And this era also saw the rise of a figure who would become central to Iran's regional strategy for decades to come, Qasem Soleimani.
Indeed. In 1997, Qasem Soleimani rose through the ranks of the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, to become the chief commander of the Quds Force. This is an elite special forces unit dedicated to Iran's overseas operations. As the U.S.-Iran conflict timeline notes, he became instrumental in spreading Iran's influence across the Middle East. He soon emerged as one of the country's most powerful leaders.
A key architect of their proxy network.
Absolutely. His name became synonymous with Iran's reach through its proxies, making him a primary target for adversaries later on.
It's abundantly clear that throughout this period, the lines between direct and indirect conflict were not just blurred, but often intentionally obscured. But were there any brief moments where de-escalation seemed possible? Any attempts to bridge this growing divide?
There were indeed brief periods, glimmers of a different potential path, although ultimately these moments proved to be short-lived.
Like what?
One such period was dubbed the mini-détente from 1998 to 2000. The Council on Foreign Relations timeline highlights a significant event. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright met with Iran's deputy foreign minister at the 6+2 talks during the 1998 UN General Assembly.
That's high-level contact.
It marked the highest-level U.S.-Iran contact since the '79 hostage crisis, a significant symbolic step. Furthermore, in April 2000, Albright publicly acknowledged the United States' role in overthrowing Mossadegh back in '53. She described previous U.S. policy toward Iran as regrettably short-sighted.
Did she apologize?
She stopped short of an explicit apology, but it was a notable diplomatic gesture. Following this, some sanctions against Iran were actually lifted, suggesting a genuine, albeit temporary, effort at de-escalation.
Interesting. And then, surprisingly, after the 9/11 attacks, there was another moment of cooperation between the U.S. and Iran, despite all the hostility.
That's right. The Bonn Agreement, signed on December 5, 2001, is a powerful example of how shared strategic interests can sometimes override deeper hostilities. According to the Council on Foreign Relations timeline, the Bush administration established a secret back channel with Iran following the 9/11 terrorist attacks.
A secret channel? Why?
The two nations actually coordinated efforts to defeat the Taliban, a shared enemy that had provided safe haven to al-Qaeda in Afghanistan.
So, common enemy made strange bedfellows.
Pretty much. In the aftermath of the 2001 U.S. invasion, the United States and Iran collaborated on the Bonn Agreement, which focused on state building in Afghanistan and the repatriation of Afghan refugees. This instance truly highlights the complexities of international relations. Even long-standing adversaries can find common ground when facing a mutual threat.
That's a critical point to remember. Even in the most entrenched conflicts, sometimes unexpected windows for cooperation open up, even if they close again quickly. Shows the pragmatic side of geopolitics. We'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsor.
We choose to go to the moon, investigate, and do the other things.
Weird.
You know, someone said that frickin' Panera's Pepsi's taste funny.
Better.
No, I mean,
What?
Okay, we're back. Having traced the intertwined roots of the U.S.-Iran relationship and the dramatic rupture of 1979, we now arrive at arguably the most volatile flashpoint in this decades-long saga, Iran's nuclear program. This isn't just about technology, it's a high-stakes game of global poker that has brought both sides to the very brink of open conflict. The revelations about the scale and nature of Iran's nuclear activities fundamentally escalated international concern. It subsequently drove much of the diplomatic and military conflict we've seen since. It really shifted the focus from proxy wars to a direct existential concern about nuclear proliferation.
When did this really come onto the international radar in a big way?
The alarm bells truly started ringing in August 2002. Western intelligence services, working with an Iranian opposition group, revealed the existence of Iran's secret Natanz nuclear enrichment facility.
Natanz, okay.
As detailed in the AP News timeline, this discovery ignited global alarm about Iran's nuclear ambitions. It suggested a much more advanced and secretive program than previously understood.
Raising immediate questions about their intentions.
Exactly.
And what was the immediate international reaction to that revelation? Did negotiations start right away?
They did begin relatively quickly. Initial negotiations started around 2003, with Britain, France, and Germany, the E3, attempting to engage Iran in nuclear talks in June of that year. Iran initially showed some willingness to de-escalate, suspending uranium enrichment in October 2003.
Okay, so there was a pause.
But this period of cooperation was short-lived. In February 2006, following the election of hardline President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad,
Ahmadinejad, right.
Iran announced it would restart uranium enrichment. This caused the European negotiations to completely stall, as documented by the AP News timeline. It signaled a hardening of Iran's stance.
And that's when we saw a new, more covert form of warfare emerge, specifically targeting Iran's nuclear infrastructure directly.
This was a crucial development. The emergence of cyber warfare as a tool of strategic disruption. In 2010, the highly sophisticated Stuxnet computer virus was discovered.
Stuxnet, I remember hearing about that.
While never officially claimed, it was widely believed to be a joint U.S.-Israeli creation. The virus was explicitly designed to disrupt and ultimately destroy Iranian centrifuges used in uranium enrichment.
Destroy them? How?
By subtly manipulating their speeds, causing them to tear themselves apart, essentially. The AP News timeline reports on this. It represented a significant shift, introducing this new covert form of warfare.
Aimed at crippling their nuclear progress without overt military strikes.
Exactly. And it fundamentally altered the landscape of international conflict, demonstrating how critical national infrastructure could be attacked remotely and invisibly.
Despite these covert attacks and stalled talks, there was a major diplomatic breakthrough under the Obama administration, leading to what many considered a landmark nuclear deal, the JCPOA.
Absolutely. Significant diplomatic efforts under the Obama administration, beginning with a secret back channel and direct calls with Iranian President Hassan Rouhani.
Rouhani, the more moderate president then.
Right. This eventually led to an initial nuclear agreement in November 2013, providing Iran with some sanctions relief. 2 years later, on July 14, 2015, Iran, the P5+1.
The 5 permanent UN Security Council members plus Germany.
Correct. And the European Union reached the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. Both the AP News and Council on Foreign Relations timelines emphasize that the deal limited Tehran's enrichment of uranium in exchange for the lifting of economic sanctions.
And the goal was to increase their breakout time.
Exactly. To increase the time it would theoretically take to develop enough fissile material for a nuclear weapon, from maybe a few weeks to at least 1 year. Seen as a critical safeguard.
So, a landmark international agreement was reached, a significant diplomatic effort, meant to put a lid on Iran's nuclear program and avert conflict. But its life, in practical terms, was relatively short-lived, wasn't it?
It was indeed. The political landscape, particularly in the United States, shifted dramatically, leading to a new and aggressive phase of escalation that ultimately unraveled much of that diplomatic progress.
You mean the U.S. withdrawal?
On May 8, 2018, President Donald Trump made a unilateral announcement that the United States would withdraw from the JCPOA and launch what he called a maximum pressure sanctions campaign against Iran.
In the reaction to that.
As noted in both the AP News and Council on Foreign Relations timelines, this move was widely condemned by many arms control experts and European allies. They feared its destabilizing effects. Conversely, many Republican lawmakers, Israel and Saudi Arabia applauded the decision, seeing it as a necessary toughening of stance.
And Iran's response?
Iran responded directly by boosting uranium enrichment in defiance of the agreement's terms, signaling that the carefully constructed safeguards of the JCPOA were now eroding. Around this time, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claimed Israel had obtained tens of thousands of pages of data showing Iran covered up its nuclear program before signing the 2015 deal.
Covert ops obtaining intelligence.
Yeah, a claim an ex-Mossad chief confirmed involved more than a dozen non-Israeli agents obtaining information from safes in Tehran in 2018, according to the AP News timeline. This fueled the narrative of Iranian deception.
And following the JCPOA withdrawal, we saw a clear escalation in targeted attacks on Iran's nuclear program and its scientists, like an almost open, undeclared war over its nuclear capabilities.
Indeed, the period from 2020 to 2022 saw a significant ramp-up in covert actions, targeting Iran's nuclear infrastructure and personnel. In July 2020, a mysterious explosion tore apart a centrifuge production plant at Iran's Natanz nuclear enrichment facility. Iran immediately blamed the attack on Israel.
Natanz again.
Then, in November 2020, a truly audacious act, the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh,
A scientist.
identified as a top Iranian military nuclear scientist, yes. Fakhrizadeh was killed by a remote-controlled machine gun while traveling in a car outside Tehran.
Remote-controlled.
That's what a top Iranian security official accused Israel of using electronic devices to remotely kill him. He was known for founding Iran's military nuclear program in the 2000s, according to both timelines. A direct strike at their expertise.
And the Neds facility, it seemed, remained a recurring target, almost a symbol of this clandestine conflict.
It did. On April 11, 2021, another attack targeted Iran's underground nuclear facility in Natanz. Again, Iran squarely blamed Israel. While Israel didn't claim responsibility, Israeli media widely reported the government had orchestrated a cyber attack, causing a blackout there.
And Iran's reaction to that attack?
In a clear act of defiance, just 5 days later, on April 16, 2021, Iran announced it would begin enriching uranium up to 60%.
60%? How close is that to weapons grade?
Weapons grade is typically 90%, so 60% was its highest purity ever achieved and a significant technical step closer. The AP News timeline emphasizes this. It demonstrated their ability to rapidly advance their program.
And even more recently, there were unusual accusations of poisoning, suggesting the methods were expanding.
That's right. In June 2022, Iran accused Israel of poisoning 2 nuclear scientists in different cities within 3 days of each other. The circumstances remained unclear, as reported by AP News. It highlights the increasingly shadowy and multifaceted nature of this conflict over Iran's nuclear capabilities.
This period truly highlights the intensity of the undeclared war being waged, often through covert means, setting the stage for what would become even more direct confrontations.
Absolutely. The last couple of years have witnessed an alarming and rapid surge in both indirect and, crucially, direct hostilities, escalating into open conflict and pushing the region to new, unprecedented levels of tension.
Where does this latest phase really kick off?
The starting point for this most recent phase of dramatic escalation was undoubtedly the Hamas militant attack from the Gaza Strip into Israel on October 7, 2023.
October 7th.
A devastating offensive. Killed 1,200 people, took 250 hostage, initiated the most intense war between Israel and Hamas, as chronicled by the AP News timeline. Iran, which had armed Hamas for years, openly offered support to the militants.
Did the U.S. think Iran was directly involved in planning the attack?
Following the attack, the U.S. and Qatar cooperated to block Iran from accessing $6 billion in humanitarian assistance released in September. But U.S. and regional intelligence officials found no immediate evidence of Iran's direct involvement in planning the offensive itself. However, experts noted, according to the Council on Foreign Relations timeline, that Iran had provided significant weapons and training to Hamas in the months prior. So, indirect but crucial support.
And that Hamas attack quickly spilled over, didn't it? Drawing Iran's proxies further into the fray.
It was a very rapid expansion. Iran and its various proxies, notably Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen, significantly expanded their campaigns against Israel throughout much of 2024, aligning with Hamas, as the Council on Foreign Relations timeline details. This created a multi-front regional conflict, intensifying pressure on Israel.
Meanwhile, Israel wasn't static. We saw a series of significant sabotage attacks and assassinations attributed to them, targeting Iranian assets and leaders of their aligned groups, moving beyond just proxies.
That's correct. On February 14, 2024, an Israeli sabotage attack caused multiple explosions on an Iranian natural gas pipeline, targeting Iran's energy infrastructure.
By pipeline attack.
Then, a highly significant escalation on April 1, 2024, an Israeli airstrike demolished Iran's consulate in Damascus, Syria.
The consulate, that's technically Iranian territory.
Exactly. It killed 16 people, including 2 Iranian generals, a direct strike on diplomatic territory, a major crossing of a perceived red line by Iran.
And the assassinations continued too.
Yes. On July 31, 2024, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated by an apparent Israeli airstrike during a visit to Tehran.
In Tehran. Wow.
Israel had publicly pledged to kill Haniyeh and other Hamas leaders over the October 7 attack. This was followed on September 27, 2024, by an Israeli airstrike that killed Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah.
Nasrallah, a huge figure.
Huge. Hezbollah was the first group Iran-backed, formed by IRGC members in '82, key to exporting their political Islam. And on October 16, 2024, Israel killed Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar in the Gaza Strip, further dismantling the leadership of Iranian-backed groups.
So, with Israel escalating its covert and targeted actions like this, how did Iran respond directly? Not just through proxies. This is where we saw truly unprecedented direct attacks.
Exactly. The retaliation from Iran was swift and historic. On April 14, 2024, Iran launched an unprecedented missile and drone attack on Israel.
The first direct attack.
The first large-scale direct attack. This was in direct response to the Israeli airstrike on its consulate in Damascus. Iran fired over 300 missiles and attack drones.
How effective was it?
That's critical here, as the AP News timeline highlights, is that working with the U.S.-led international coalition, Israel managed to intercept much of the incoming fire, showcasing significant defensive capabilities.
But it was still a groundbreaking event.
Absolutely. Iran had historically relied on proxies. Now it was directly employing its own military assets on a massive scale against Israel. Iran then launched its second direct attack on Israel on October 1st, 2024, though again a U.S.-led coalition and Israel shot down most of the missiles.
So these direct attacks shattered a long-standing pattern.
They established a new and more dangerous precedent for open military engagement between the two nations.
And in response to these direct Iranian attacks, Israel also escalated its own direct military actions against Iran, moving from suspected covert ops to overt strikes on Iranian soil.
That's right. The conflict moved into a new phase of declared direct military engagements. On April 19, 2024, a suspected Israeli strike hit an air defense system near an airport in Isfahan, Iran. This was followed by an even more significant development on October 26, 2024, when Israel openly attacked Iran for the first time.
Openly admitting it.
Yes. Striking air defense systems and sites associated with its missile program, as both timelines confirm. A profound shift from indirect and covert to declared direct military engagements.
And bringing us right up to the present moment, 2025 has seen even more intense and rapid developments. Executions, diplomatic attempts unraveling, massive military strikes.
The pace of events has been staggering. On April 30, 2025, Iran executed a man it claimed worked for Israel's Mossad and played a role in the killing of an IRGC colonel back in 2022.
Tightening internal security.
Right. Around the same time, in April 2025, a second Donald Trump administration began with mixed messaging regarding Iran. Both a warning concerning its support for the Houthis and a simultaneous signal of interest in nuclear talks. Weeks later, Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, and Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araqi, held face-to-face talks on Iran's nuclear program.
Actual face-to-face talks.
Yes, documented in the Council on Foreign Relations timeline. Details weren't fully released, but both sides confirmed progress, indicated discussions on a new framework for a nuclear deal. U.S. messaging was somewhat mixed, though. Witkoff publicly suggesting a cap on enrichment, while Iran maintained its right to enrich for peaceful purposes. The goal remained limits for sanctions relief.
A challenging diplomatic tightrope. But despite those diplomatic overtures, the military action intensified dramatically in June, an unprecedented level of direct confrontation.
It truly exploded. Friday, June 13, 2025, Israel launched blistering attacks on the heart of Iran's nuclear and military structure.
Oh.
The operation involved deploying warplanes and drones previously smuggled into the country to assault key facilities and kill top generals and scientists. An exceptionally aggressive deep strike.
And it didn't stop there.
No. The escalation continued over the weekend. Saturday, June 14th, Israel expanded its airstrikes to include targets in Iran's energy industry as Iranian missile attacks continued on Israel. By Sunday, June 15th, Israel unleashed airstrikes across Iran for a third consecutive day, threatening even greater force. Some Iranian missiles did manage to evade Israeli air defenses and strike buildings in Israel.
And those talks in Oman.
Amidst this escalating violence, planned talks on Iran's nuclear program in Oman between the United States and Tehran, which could have provided an off-ramp. They were called off. Diplomacy collapsed.
And then, the U.S. directly entered the military fray with its own unprecedented strike, using powerful new munitions.
This was the most dramatic direct action to date, pushing the conflict into uncharted territory. After weeks of fraught nuclear talks failed to progress, President Trump decided to carry out an overnight attack on June 21st, directly hitting 3 of Iran's atomic centers, Fordo, Natanz, and the Isfahan Center.
How were they hit?
The operation deployed B-2 bombers on Fordo and Natanz and launched Tomahawk missiles at Isfahan. Trump called it a spectacular military success. A Pentagon spokesperson stated all 3 sites sustained extremely severe damage, though the full extent wasn't immediately clear. Iran vowed everlasting consequences.
And this was the first direct U.S. strike on Iranian territory.
Yes, and crucially, the first real-world use of the U.S. bombs known colloquially as bunker busters.
Bunker busters.
Massive specialized munitions designed to penetrate deeply reinforced targets underground before detonating, believed to be the only explosives capable of reaching Iran's deeply buried nuclear sites. A strategically significant and deeply escalatory move.
And alongside these physical attacks, there were also reports of a critical digital disruption, affecting Iran's ability to communicate.
Yes, the AP News Tech section reported that alongside these attacks, Iran experienced an internet blackout, reportedly left the public in the dark, created an uneven picture of the war, suggesting a multi-layered assault.
So what does this all mean for the immediate future of the Middle East and the broader global stage? It's a moment of unprecedented direct military action with huge implications. Now, it's impossible to talk about the Middle East, its history, its conflicts, without intimately addressing the role of oil. But how does the global energy market, with its complex dynamics, specifically intertwine with the escalating tensions and direct confrontations we've just discussed between Israel and Iran? How does it serve as both a source of power and vulnerability in this particular conflict?
Well, oil is far more than just a commodity here. It's intrinsically linked to the region's stability, its economic power, its global leverage. It constantly influences power dynamics and strategic decisions. It's truly a constant undercurrent to all these geopolitical shifts we've been discussing. It acts as both a motivator and a tool in the conflict.
How so? Like OPEC's influence?
Exactly. OPEC's enduring influence dates back to its founding in 1960, with Iran as a key member, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries.
Right, set up to rival Western oil companies.
Precisely. To reestablish control over their member nations' domestic oil reserves. By the 1970s, OPEC's profits skyrocketed, granting the group considerable leverage over Western economies. Iran's active role within OPEC allowed it to leverage its oil resources as a significant tool against Western powers, and also to fund its military buildup and support for regional proxies, especially after the revolution.
And that power dynamic continues to play out today, doesn't it? With OPEC Plus decisions still moving global markets and impacting our daily lives directly.
Absolutely. The world consumes over 100 million barrels of oil per day, with demand expected to continue increasing, particularly from Asia. That's noted in a Council on Foreign Relations academic webinar. The fluctuations we're seeing in global oil prices, directly impacted by OPEC Plus decisions and, say, Russia's maneuvering, underscore the constant critical challenge of energy security.
Ensuring stable, affordable energy.
Right. The recent OPEC Plus decision to reduce production by 1.2 million barrels a day surprised many analysts, especially as it occurred at a time of tight global oil supply. Saudi Arabia, according to the same webinar, is considered to be in the driver's seat within OPEC, producing 10 to 11 million barrels per day, giving them immense sway over supply and global prices.
Which directly impacts the regional power balance with Iran.
Definitely.
And Russia, despite extensive international sanctions following its actions in Ukraine, remains a major player in the oil markets, finding ways to continue its exports. That must have broader implications.
That's a critical point, and it has direct implications for sanction regimes targeting countries like Iran, too. Despite extensive sanctions, Russia continues to produce and export oil. The geopolitical landscape has reshaped oil flows dramatically, much of Russia's oil now moving from west to east.
Finding new buyers.
Finding new takers in countries like China, India, Turkey, Singapore, often at discounted prices. This is highlighted in that CFR academic webinar. The challenges of effectively curtailing Russian oil exports are partly due to Russia's significant revenue needs to fund what's described as a very expensive war.
So they find workarounds.
They've found various ways to circumvent sanctions, using shadow tankers, leveraging existing infrastructure like the East Siberian pipeline to China. It demonstrates the immense difficulty in dislodging a major energy producer from global markets, and by extension, makes it harder to isolate other sanctioned oil-producing nations like Iran.
And how do these global dynamics, especially around Russian oil and OPEC Plus decisions, ultimately affect the U.S. market and global economies more broadly?
Well, while U.S. sanctions are usually carefully designed to avoid causing massive disruptions to global oil supply, the potential for deeper curtailment on Russian oil or further significant cuts from OPEC Plus fallow would inevitably impact global prices.
Which means higher prices at the pump for us.
Exactly. It directly affects prices for American consumers at the gas pump, as the CFR academic webinar explains. It's a direct line from geopolitical strategy to your wallet. The U.S. has even previously tapped its strategic petroleum reserves, the SPR, to cushion consumers from these price spikes, illustrating direct government intervention.
And it's not just the U.S. that's strategically responding. Countries like India and China are actively shaping their energy security through how they purchase oil, often taking advantage of these geopolitical shifts.
Indeed. India, a rapidly growing economy, 1.4 billion people, it has strategically purchased discounted Russian oil for national security purposes. That was discussed in the CFR webinar. Furthermore, India has been actively building out its refining capacity, using this discounted oil for both domestic consumption and for re-exporting refined petroleum products.
Turning a strategic purchase into an economic advantage.
Precisely. China has also been a significant buyer of discounted Russian oil. Even when its overall oil demand was down in 2022, much of the oil it purchased from Russia went towards its strategic supplies, enhancing its energy reserves. And like India, China is also expanding its refining capacity.
And how are they managing the sanctions aspect?
Well, what's particularly notable here is how these countries and Russia itself have adapted. A lot of oil trading that traditionally happened in Europe has now shifted. Russia has found ways to bypass some sanctions by setting up new trading houses, sometimes in locations that allow them to circumvent compliance. There have even been cases, like a recent one from Malaysia mentioned in the webinar, where Russian barrels were sold under a different origin to evade sanctions.
Wow, so they're getting creative.
It really underscores the ingenuity employed to navigate and sometimes undermine global sanctions regimes, making it challenging for countries like the U.S. to fully leverage sanctions as a tool of pressure against adversaries like Iran.
This deep interconnectedness means that energy stability and accessibility are always on the front lines in moments of heightened geopolitical tension, directly impacting global economies and daily lives, creating complex interdependencies far beyond the immediate conflict zones.
Looking back at this incredibly complex and often tumultuous history and the rapid pace of current events, it's abundantly clear that the relationship between Israel, Iran, and the broader global powers is not static. It's a continuously evolving saga. Nuclear ambitions and the critical importance of energy security remain central, driving much of the conflict and the diplomatic efforts to contain it. We've seen how deeply historical grievances can shape present actions, and how technological advancements, from cyber warfare to bunker busters, continually redefine the boundaries of conflict.
Yeah, we've seen a consistent pattern of actions on one side, leading to significant reactions on the other. It creates this deeply entrenched cycle that proves incredibly difficult to break. This entire situation, with its deep historical roots and escalating present, it raises an important, maybe even provocative question for you, our listener, to consider. How might the ongoing global energy transition, or perhaps the uneven pace of it, further reshape the geopolitical dynamics of the Middle East, especially as countries like those across the African continent strive to meet their own rapidly growing energy demands, potentially diverging from established energy pathways of developed nations? What new challenges and opportunities might emerge from that shift, and how might it impact the future of stability in this already volatile region?
That's a critical point to ponder as we continue to watch these momentous events unfold in the years ahead. Thank you for joining us for this analysis.